Have you ever wondered why a woman's silence haunts a man more deeply than her words ever could? It is not noise that undoes a man. It is the absence of it. The hollow echo where once there was warmth, softness, perhaps even defiance. A woman's silence is not passive. It is not empty. It is not weak. It is the storm after the thunder, the darkness after the flame, the mirror in which a man must finally confront himself without distraction. Carl Jung wrote of the anima, the unconscious feminine within every man. She whispers not through words, but through dreams, obsessions, moods he cannot explain. And when a real woman embodies that silent archetype, she becomes not just a lover or a muse. She becomes his reflection, his test, his reckoning, because she has pulled back. And in her withdrawal, she has turned the mirror around. You see, most men have never met themselves. Not truly. They move through life projecting their shadows, blaming, chasing, controlling, casting their inner wounds onto the women they desire. They mistake possession for intimacy, dominance for connection. But the feminine doesn't bow to illusion forever. There comes a moment when she sees, not just the man, but the mask he wears, the fear behind the power, the insecurity behind the arrogance. And instead of calling it out, she does something far more dangerous. She falls silent. This silence is not the cold shoulder of manipulation. It is not the punishment of a wounded girl. No, this is the silence of the awakened feminine, the woman who has stepped out of the drama, who no longer feels the need to prove, explain, or convince. She has stopped fighting for scraps of validation. She has dropped the sword, and in doing so, has pierced the ego more deeply than any weapon ever could. Because the masculine ego thrives on reaction. It feeds off her emotion, her confusion, her attempts to fix or please. When she begs, he feels power. When she explains, he feels control. But when she says nothing, when she walks away with nothing but stillness, it terrifies him. Not because she's gone, but because now he must sit with himself. There is no distraction, no one to blame, no drama to reenact, just the silence and the emptiness inside. It is in that silence that the real war begins. He may lash out, trying to provoke her return. He may accuse her of cruelty, of detachment, of not caring. But this is projection. This is the shadow screaming for attention, for salvation. He doesn't want her voice. He wants her to rescue him from himself. But she will not. Because the sacred feminine has learned something that many never do. She is not here to heal a man who refuses to bleed in the open. She is not here to mother his ego or make his unprocessed trauma more palatable. She is not here to translate his silence while suffocating in her own. Her silence is not rejection. It is reclamation. And it is this that unravels him. Not her absence, but what it represents. The loss of the one who saw him beneath the armor. The disappearance of the one who reflected his soul back to him. When she was near, he could avoid the truth by projecting it. But now he stands alone in front of the ruins of his illusions. Jung wrote that the encounter with the feminine is what initiates the man into individuation, the path to becoming whole. But that path begins with the death of ego. And ego does not die quietly. It rages. It resists. It begs to be fed again. But the feminine silence offers no nourishment, no comfort, only a choice. Confront the truth or continue the cycle with someone else, somewhere else, until the silence returns again. So when you, as a woman, choose to become still, not from fear, but from fullness, you become untouchable. Not because you don't feel, but because you've risen above the noise. You no longer need to defend your worth or prove your value to a man who cannot see beyond his projection. And when he finally does see, if he ever does, it will not be your voice that echoes in his mind. It will be the moment you stopped speaking. The moment you walked away not with rage, but with peace. That's the moment that breaks him. That's the moment that makes him question everything he thought he was. Because you didn't just walk away from him. You walked back to yourself. And what does a man see when her silence begins to echo in his psyche? At first, chaos. A frantic scrambling to regain the image, the control, the affirmation that once made him feel like more than he was. But as the storm within him settles, something deeper rises from the shadow. Not guilt, not even grief, but a dreadful emptiness. Because the silence she left behind is not silent at all. It speaks. It speaks of all the parts of himself he refused to face. It screams of the boy within the man, abandoned, afraid, starved for approval, now left without his favorite mirror to reflect him back as whole. In that abyss, he may come to understand something terrifying. She wasn't punishing him. She was freeing herself. And in doing so, she revealed the invisible cage he lived in. Her silence was a door closing. Yes, but it was also a mirror turned inward. No longer could he outsource his identity to the way she looked at him, touched him, soothed him. That feminine energy he took for granted, her presence, her chaos, her warmth, it was never his to own. And in the absence of her voice, he is left with his own. And he finds it hollow. The feminine is water, flowing, intuitive, emotional. But when she becomes still, she becomes a lake. Deep, reflective, impossible to escape. And for the man who's never swum in his own depths, her stillness is terrifying. Because in her silence, she doesn't just stop giving. She invites him to receive something he's never known. Responsibility, ownership, conscious awareness. This is where Jung's archetypes begin to dance behind the scenes. She, the anima withdrawn, leaves the man to face his animus shadow, rigid, brittle, disconnected from the heart. He is now alone with the father within, the tyrant or the ghost, the one who demanded achievement but denied emotion. And without her nurturing gaze to soothe him, without her emotional labor to make him feel enough, he spirals, not outward, but inward, into the self. It is here that many men break, not because of her silence, but because of what it reveals, that love is not earned through dominance, possession, or performance. That true power is not control over her, it's integration of himself. And you, woman, when you understand this, you become something unshakable. You no longer seek revenge or pity. You don't explain your silence. You don't try to be understood. You simply are, not as a tactic, but as a truth. Because the silence born from deep feminine self-worth is not cold, it's sacred. It says, I have nothing to prove and nothing to fix. Your healing is not mine to carry. To the man unready to meet himself, this silence is cruel. But to the one on the path to wholeness, it becomes the greatest gift. It forces him to confront the unconscious patterns he's repeated through every relationship. The way he confuses her chaos with danger. The way he mistakes her boundaries for betrayal. The way he asks her to mother what his inner child never received. And some men, rare men, will rise from this silence transformed. They will not beg, manipulate, or chase. They will not make her the villain in their hero's story. They will go into the fire. They will sit with the silence. Let it consume the noise of the ego. And from the ashes, something else will rise. Presence. Clarity. Real masculinity. Not the performative kind, but the rooted, grounded essence that does not fear her silence, because it knows how to meet her depth. But most won't get there. Most will move on to the next woman, hoping she speaks loud enough to drown out what the last one left behind. They will chase volume, not meaning. And still, that silence will follow them. Because it was never about her. It was always about the self. You must understand, your silence is a rite of passage. Not just for him, for you. It marks the death of the pleaser, the fixer, the girl who needed to be needed. It is the voice of the queen who no longer begs the jester to understand her worth. She doesn't argue with chaos. She becomes the calm. She doesn't fight for attention. She radiates value. And that radiance? It speaks louder than any word you could say. The silence of the empowered feminine is not an absence of love. It is a purification of it. When a woman becomes quiet, truly quiet, it is because something within her has awakened. Not a spark of resentment, not a flicker of revenge, but the blazing fire of discernment. She has tasted what it means to be ignored, underestimated, gaslit, or adored for the wrong reasons. And she has chosen to no longer be an actress in someone else's script. This silence is sacred. It is earned. Because before she grew silent, she tried. She tried to explain herself, to be soft enough not to frighten him, bright enough to inspire him, still enough to soothe him. She bent, adapted, morphed into shapes that pleased and comforted. She lowered her frequency just to meet him where he was. Not because she was weak, but because she believed in love's potential. But love without self-worth is a currency that always runs dry. And one day, she stopped spending. And in that moment, something alchemical happened. Her silence became the ceremony in which her false self died, and her true self was born. Carl Jung spoke of individuation, the painful process of becoming one's whole self. Most women begin this journey not with words, but with withdrawal, a quiet returning to the body, a refusal to perform, the rejection of roles inherited from mothers, lovers, and broken cultural myths that taught her to shrink. And this withdrawal, it is magnetic, unknowable, both feared and revered. Because the woman who has returned to her own soul is untouchable in a world addicted to external validation. Men feel it. The ones who once basked in her attention now reach for it like air that's been stolen from the room. Her silence isn't rejection, it's revelation. She no longer speaks to be heard. She listens to her own knowing. She no longer explains herself to avoid abandonment. She sits peacefully with the knowledge that those who cannot meet her depth were never meant to stay. And it is this, precisely this, that breaks the ego of a man. Not because she broke his heart, but because she dismantled the illusion that his power came from her devotion. He realizes, too late, that it was her energy that gave him shape, her vulnerability that softened his edges, her faith that held up the parts of him that couldn't yet stand on their own. When she falls silent, he is left to hold his own weight, to examine the ruins of the pedestal he demanded but never earned. If the man is wise, truly wise, he will not see her silence as punishment. He will see it as a mirror. He will ask himself, why did I only feel strong when she was shrinking for me? Why did I only feel loved when she explained herself over and over? Why did I call her too emotional when it was her emotion that nourished me? In her absence, the distorted masculine has nowhere to hide. The chase no longer works. The charm is met with stillness. The demands echo back as hollow threats. Because she is no longer in the arena. She has left the battlefield of projection and manipulation, and she has returned to the temple of herself. And that temple does not open for noise. It opens for stillness, for courage, for truth. So let the world misinterpret her. Let them call her cold, distant, too much, too quiet. Let them paint her silence with the colors of their own fear. She knows the truth. She has walked through the fire. She has died to the illusion of being chosen. Now she chooses. And to the man who can hold the silence with her, who can match her in stillness, not to dominate it, but to honor it, she becomes a sanctuary. Not because she needs him, but because she has no fear of being alone. And this is the paradox that haunts the male ego. The more a woman knows her worth, the less she needs to prove it, and the more her presence, or her absence, shapes the men who encounter her. The feminine silence does not punish. It invites. It demands a reckoning. And not every man is ready to meet it. There comes a moment in a man's life, if he is lucky, when he realizes that the silence of a woman wasn't an end, but a threshold, a passage not into loneliness, but into authenticity, into self-confrontation, into the graveyard of old identities. Because if he can sit in the void she left behind without escaping into distraction or conquest, he will hear something he's never heard before, the voice of his own abandoned self. This is the same self he tried to outrun with success, with bravado, with the illusion of dominance. The self that longed to be seen but hid behind performance. And now, stripped of her mirroring presence, he must face what's been hidden all along. He has mistaken her nurturing for weakness, her devotion for dependency, her love for servitude. But when the feminine stops speaking, the echo of all that she carried grows deafening. It is not her words that haunt him. It is the sudden, crushing realization that her presence once made him feel alive. Not because of who she was, but because she reflected the man he could be, the one she believed in, the one she waited for, the one she built dreams around. And now, with her retreat, he's left not just with the absence of a woman, but the absence of the man he thought he was becoming. This is what Carl Jung called the crisis of transformation. The ego begins to crack. The defenses shatter. The projections recoil. He sees his own fear of abandonment, his deep-rooted shame, his addiction to being admired but not known. And in that silence, there is no woman left to soothe the wound. Only the wound remains. And for the woman, this is liberation. Not from him, but from the burden of carrying the relationship on her back. From the quiet violence of being unheard. from the slow erosion of self that occurs when you are constantly asked to diminish your truth to keep the peace. Her silence is not absence. It is the full presence of her unspoken wisdom. She has reclaimed the parts of herself she once gave away too freely. Her time, her energy, her emotional labor. She no longer trades her essence for breadcrumbs of affection. She no longer defines her worth through a man's ability to hold space for her. She holds space for herself. She is not waiting for closure. She is the closure. This is the death of the good girl, the one who needed to be liked, chosen, saved, and the birth of the sovereign woman, unapologetic, discerning, whole. She no longer confuses connection with caretaking. She no longer confuses chemistry with destiny. She no longer believes that suffering is proof of love. Her silence is not quiet. It is thunder. It is the earthquake that rearranges the tectonic plates of her life. And once it has passed, nothing remains the same. The men who encounter her after this rebirth will sense something different. They will feel it before she even speaks. Her energy no longer asks to be understood. It no longer bends to accommodate fragility. It no longer softens to make others feel powerful. She has become fluent in a language few men understand, the language of self-worth. She does not chase. She does not compete. She does not negotiate her intuition. And the man who once held her, if he sees clearly, will understand that he never truly did. He held her body, perhaps, her affection, her attention, but not her soul. That was always waiting for him to arrive. To meet her, not as a boy in need of rescue, but as a man who has faced his own shadow and survived. And if he ever does, if he walks the path of introspection, dismantles the structures of his performative masculinity, and meets her again, not to reclaim her, but to honor her, then, and only then might the silence shift, not into words, but into resonance, not into noise, but into truth, a shared stillness, a mutual presence, the kind that requires no performance, no pleading, no pretense, just two souls, awake, whole, free. But even if he never returns, she does not look back, because her silence was not a strategy. It was a ceremony. And once a woman has crowned herself in the temple of her own becoming, she does not descend to convince the world of her worth. She lets the world rise to meet it. There is a power in the feminine that doesn't shout, doesn't beg, doesn't tear down. It simply withdraws, and in that withdrawal, it dismantles the entire scaffolding of the fragile masculine ego. The woman who becomes silent is not disappearing. She is expanding, beyond roles, beyond expectations, beyond the illusion that her value lies in how much she can endure. She is not vanishing. She is returning, to herself, to her center, to the ancient knowing that she was never meant to perform love like a dance to earn devotion. And this return, this reclamation, is what terrifies the unconscious masculine. Because to truly meet a woman who no longer needs your validation is to meet a force of nature. You cannot shape her, mold her, or hold her in a way that diminishes her fullness. You must rise or be left behind. There is no middle path. Carl Jung once warned that what we do not face in ourselves will appear in our lives as fate. For the man untouched by his own depths, the woman's silence feels like abandonment, betrayal, even cruelty. But the wise man will see, it is fate. It is the unconscious calling him home. Her silence is not the end. It is the mirror of every time he chose pride over intimacy. Every time he rejected vulnerability because he feared being seen. Every moment he mistook her depth for danger, her emotions for chaos, her boundaries for rejection. She did not abandon him. She simply stopped waiting for him to arrive. Because the awakened woman does not exist to be the emotional scaffolding for a man too afraid to look within. She is not the balm for his wounds, nor the justification for his numbness. She is a gateway to healing or to heartbreak. The choice is his. In the silence, she has nothing to prove. Her worth is not on trial. Her value is not a debate. She no longer translates her soul into a language small enough to be digested by a man who has only ever dined on ego. She speaks in silence now, in space, in absence. And it is there that the ego is dismantled, piece by piece. The man who survives this silence with open eyes will never be the same. He will stop looking for approval and conquest. He will stop mistaking control for security. He will stop blaming her for the emotional deserts he refuses to water within himself. He will go inward. He will break. He will fall into the pieces of his shadow. And if he is brave enough, he will emerge. Not as a louder man, as a deeper one. The kind of man who can hold space for a woman's silence. Not because he needs to win her back, but because he honors what her absence taught him. The kind of man who no longer flees from complexity, but moves toward it. Who no longer fears emotion, but reveres it. Who no longer sees a powerful woman as a threat, but as an invitation. And you, the woman who chose silence, you are not waiting. You are not watching, wondering if he understands now, if he regrets it, if he misses you. That chapter has closed. Because your silence was not a question. It was the answer. It was the moment you stopped speaking and started being, without apology, without explanation. You did not leave to be chased. You left to return, to your power, your boundaries, your rhythm. You stopped explaining your soul to those committed to misunderstanding it. You stopped bleeding for love that would not nourish you. You stopped arguing with projections and began protecting your peace. And in that choice, you became untouchable. Not because you built walls, but because you raised your standards. Not because you don't feel, but because you no longer leak. Not because you don't love, but because you love from wholeness, not hunger. And that wholeness, it doesn't chase. It chooses. The man who can sit in your silence and still see your worth without needing to diminish it, he is rare. But he exists. And he will not fear your silence. He will bow to it. He will see that it was never about noise. It was about knowing. And when he finally speaks, not from ego, but from essence, it won't be to fix or to claim. It will be to witness. But even if that man never comes, you are already home. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase. She chooses.